Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to review the entirety of Star Trek Discovery, and I want to rank all the seasons, which will allow me to discuss which parts of the show were relatively better than others, and it's all from my subjective point of view. Not everyone will think the same way as I did. Some people might dislike the things I liked and vice versa. So this is purely my subjective opinion, and I think one of the most annoying things to me about the show was when things just didn't make any sense, which happened often, unfortunately. And I'm not even talking about the scientific mistakes and stuff like that, which all the Star Trek shows had, even though not as much as this one. But even basic common sense stuff didn't make any sense. So when it was against basic logic, that's when it really drove me nuts. And for me personally, the first two seasons were the most annoying, mostly because of the continuity issue with the rest of the Star Trek universe, because this show started out as a prequel, but was basically a reboot, reinventing everything, redesigning the Klingons, for example, disregarding a lot of continuity from the other shows, showing technology that shouldn't have existed yet in that time period of the Star Trek history, and shoehorning in Michael as Spock's adoptive sister, and all kinds of things like that, which was a violation of continuity. And so that was really annoying to me in the first two seasons. After the ship jumped into the far future and became basically a sequel show, I think it was an improvement, mostly because it stopped annoying me continuity-wise. Suddenly the technology made a little bit more sense, even though it still had a bunch of logical problems, but it was not as annoying as the first two seasons. Also, a lot of annoying characters who were in the first two seasons disappeared from the show at that point, which was a good thing. Characters such as Amanda and Sarek. So at least the show kind of tried to improve and tried to stop annoying the fans after a while, after they realized they messed it up. They tried to fix a few things, and so I do kind of appreciate it, and I do think the show improved in a lot of ways when it jumped to the future, and was not as annoying to me personally as the first two seasons, because they were pretending to be a prequel while totally disregarding all of continuity and messing things up and retconning things and rebooting things and showing technology being too advanced and all of that. And I kept saying, why didn't you just set the whole show in the future and all of that? And maybe they listened to me, maybe they tried to fix it. And it's funny how they never showed the Klingons again when they were in the future. We never saw a single Klingon. And so at least the show tried to fix some of the issues that were annoying to the fans. And so I do kind of appreciate it, and I do think the show improved overall, maybe except season 5, because season 5 was just so pointless and boring that I think it was even worse than the first two seasons. And so I think I will have to put season 5 at the very bottom as the worst season of the show. The only episode I kind of enjoyed was the one when they were jumping through time, even though it made absolutely no sense. The ship was fluctuating in time, and yet certain people remembered what was going on and others didn't, and so it made absolutely no sense, but at least it had some funny scenes, like Michael fighting herself from season 1. And also that episode when they infiltrated the bridge ship was kind of okay, with some funny moments. And the very last episode at least had a few interesting visuals, like that place with all the gateways and all of that. But overall the season proved to be kind of pointless. The whole storyline didn't really have a satisfying conclusion. And so I actually will have to put season 5 as the worst one. Because even season 1 and 2, with their many flaws, were still more entertaining than this. At least it had more things going on, and it had some fun characters. For example, I really enjoyed the Captain Lorca in season 1. I think that was one of the redeeming elements of season 1. And it had some nice surprises and twists, also with the Ash Tyler twist, even though everyone kind of guessed it. And so it wasn't done as well as it should have been, but it was still an interesting idea. And the episodes in the Mirror universe were kind of fun, and so season 1 was not all bad. It did have some enjoyable elements about it, and especially Captain Lorca, I think. And season 2 had Captain Pike, who was very charismatic and felt like an actual Starfleet captain, with some morality in him, because, one of the issues in season 1 was that everything was way too dark and dystopian and creepy, and I guess it was intentional, but it kind of was off-putting. And also visually, I think season 1 was probably the worst one visually, because everything was literally dark all the time, and with the lens flares and the constant shaky cam and the camera spinning around all the time, and everything is blue and dark. And so visually I think season 1 was probably the worst one. And season 2 and the other seasons were a big improvement, because they stopped with that kind of style. They made it more bright, more colorful, with less gimmicks and all of that. And so season 1 was terrible visually, but at least it had a cohesive storyline that kind of made sense in its own context, meaning if we don't know all the other Star Trek shows existed, if you just look at the season 1 of Discovery, it had an internal logical story and it had some interesting surprises, and so I think season 1 might be actually better than season 2, even though season 2 was much better visually. It stopped with that dark blue style I just complained about, and it even added back some of the optimism of Star Trek. Captain Pike felt like an actual Starfleet officer and he was very charismatic. But I cannot forgive season 2 for not making any sense. And you know, I tried to make sense of it. I made a very long video drawing out all the convoluted time travel story of season 2, and I almost kind of admire how ambitious it was, that they made it so convoluted. And it did have some interesting elements about it, and so I wish it would have worked. I even tried to come up with excuses to fill some of the gaps, because a few things just didn't make any sense. They didn't connect properly to each other. There were a bunch of mistakes in the overall plot of it, and because of that, it all falls apart, unfortunately. And so logically, season 2 does not really work, even in its own context, and of course it added even more continuity problems with the other Star Trek shows, like everyone knowing about Section 31, as if it's some kind of second Starfleet with its own ships and its own uniforms and badges, and everyone can see the black badge and know it's Section 31, and internal logical problems like they cannot contact Starfleet, but Sarek keeps visiting the Discovery on his shuttle and comes back and forth between the Discovery and Vulcan, and yet they cannot give him a message to give to Starfleet when they cannot contact the rest of Starfleet. Or suddenly they forget they have a spore drive. Like for some reason, for most of season 2, they barely even use the spore drive. They use the normal warp engines, which suddenly are just as fast as the spore drive apparently, since they cannot even use the spore drive to escape Control, who is chasing them around the galaxy, but no one ever suggests simply using the spore drive to get away. Instead, they concoct that convoluted plot to jump the whole ship to the future to escape it. And also the Red Angel suit itself, which is from the past, and yet it's way more advanced than anything we've seen, even in the later seasons that are set 1,000 years in the future. Even there they didn't have that advanced of a technology anywhere. And so it's absolutely ridiculous. And it's too bad, because it did have some elements that could have worked. If they could have simply written it a little bit better, with some more logic, I would have enjoyed that season. You know, visually, as I said, it's probably the best season. It is the most ambitious. It had some really ambitious special effects and space battles, and it was all kind of very epic and visually impressive, and so it's too bad it doesn't make any sense, and so it's all just becomes a mess. And so because of that, I think I will have to put season 2 below season 1. Because at least season 1 made some kind of sense in its internal storyline, and it had some nice surprises which we did not see coming right away, unlike the so-called surprise of season 2 that Michael turns out to be the Red Angel, which everyone guessed right away. And so the surprises they tried to pull in season 2 didn't really work, and they did have some interesting scenes here and there, like Pike seeing his own future was interesting and a well done scene. And so I'm not saying the entirety of the show was bad. Even Spock, as annoying as it is that they shoehorned in Michael as his sister, at least they did have some interesting scenes together, and the actors were good. But all that part with Section 31, which was basically the Terminator story only in Star Trek, like it was basically Skynet trying to take over, and it needed a discovery because it had that sphere data, which it needed to become self-aware, even though it already was self-aware. And I do think season 3 and 4 were better than all these seasons, and now I will have to pick which one is the best, or the least bad. First of all, in season 3 it was kind of a dystopian again, because the Federation was gone, and everything in the future is ruined, and everyone are depressed all the time. Kind of the running theme of that season was that everyone suffered some kind of tragic loss and have to recover from it, and so all of season 3 felt really kind of depressing, and not as optimistic as Star Trek shows often were. And so season 4 kind of fixed that and suddenly became optimistic again. Suddenly the Federation came back, and also the plot of the season was about studying some space anomaly which was causing havoc in the galaxy, and so they had to figure it out scientifically. And later, when they realize there's some bigger species out there which are causing it, then they have to make first contact with it and to be diplomatic with them, and also solve the conflict in peaceful ways in the end. So in many ways, I would say season 4 is the most Star Trek-ish of all of Discovery's seasons. However, the first half of season 4 was really boring. Like, I wouldn't want to rewatch it because everything is moving so slowly, nothing really that exciting about it, and also a lot of annoying elements such as the smugness of some of the characters. Also, Michael Burnham is now the captain of Discovery, and they're constantly having all kinds of smug scenes of them patting themselves on the back all the time and praising Michael constantly, kind of holier than thou attitude that she knows best and she has to lecture everyone all the time. And worst of all, it was simply boring, so there was little memorable moments. And also this season didn't really have any interesting villains at all. They kind of made Book into a villain because his planet was destroyed and so he wants revenge, and so he betrays the Discovery, he becomes kind of a villain. And there's that guy Tarka, who was kind of like Lorca 2.0, like they tried to do the same thing again as Lorca. He even had a similar motivation, that he did everything he did just because he wanted to get back to some other universe or something. And he was a fun character, I did enjoy his sarcasm and all of that. So he was one of the redeeming elements, but there was no interesting villain other than that. And those aliens I mentioned turned out not to be evil because they simply didn't know they're destroying whole planets full of life. Somehow they didn't bother to check, and so I guess that makes them not so evil because they didn't know. They did it from afar without checking. Or maybe because they're such advanced aliens, they just don't consider humanoids to be intelligent, even though they have starships and all of that, but they didn't consider them to be intelligent until they came knocking on their door to communicate with them. But I did like the overall idea, which is similar to the Star Trek vision of an optimistic future with a federation who are collaborating and trying to make peaceful diplomatic solution to problems and scientific solutions to figure out problems and studying space anomalies. And so season 4 in many ways was what Star Trek should be, but it was just so boring and it has so little rewatchability, and so I just cannot put it as the top season. And so I'm kind of left now with season 3, which I had a lot of problems with. I remember being really annoyed at season 3 at first, because I thought to myself, after they've ruined the past of Star Trek and tried to retcon everything, now they're jumping to the future and ruining that too. Now they say the Federation was destroyed and the galaxy is more like the Star Wars galaxy now, with a bunch of mercenaries running around and all of that. And so I didn't like that at first. However, because in the end of that season they kind of fixed things, they kind of brought the Federation back, and so it had an optimistic ending. Because of that, I am able to forgive what they did at first, meaning destroying the whole Federation might be annoying in some ways, but I also think it was a good opportunity to actually make the Star Trek universe a little bit more interesting. Because, you know, if it was always this benevolent federation of planets which is perfect without any problems, if it's always like that, then it will eventually get boring. And also the issue of the advanced technology will become a problem for any future TV show, because if everything is perfect, technology is advancing non-stop all the time, then everyone will have basically magic powers, and it will be very boring for a TV show if they're overpowered all the time. So they will all have advanced technology and they will have a bunch of ships showing up as backup all the time, so it will just be a boring universe to watch if it will be that way. And so how can we move forward into the future of Star Trek without this problem? And so I think the idea of the burn was actually an interesting way to do it, meaning we can advance into the future but also limit your abilities at the same time. Meaning we can say that because the lithium is now a scarce resource, then we can no longer have as many ships as we had before, or we wouldn't be able to go at the same speeds. We can even use that to explain some other technologies seemingly not advancing as they should have. And so the burn, I know, was kind of annoying in many ways, especially how they explained it in the end, but the idea of limiting the resources of the galaxy and kind of having a technological setback is kind of a good idea simply for future TV shows, even though they kind of fixed everything by the end of the season, and so it's not really an issue anymore in the following seasons, which maybe was a mistake. And also bringing back the Federation so quickly right away, maybe they should have waited a little bit with that, because it did have some interesting ideas to play with. The idea that Earth left the Federation and now stands on its own was kind of annoying to me, but it does have the potential to play around with it a little bit more. And also having the Federation be not Earth-centric is also kind of a fresher idea that would be interesting to play with. They kind of fixed all of it by the end of the season, and in the next seasons it's all back to normal. Once again, everyone have dilithium. Once again, there's a federation. And so I think it was kind of a missed opportunity. I think season 3 was actually, in some ways, maybe the most imaginative seasons of the show, because at least it felt kind of fresh. At least it felt as if they're doing something new that wasn't done before. At least it felt kind of interesting and mysterious. And I know a lot of people hated that revelation that it was some kid who caused the disaster because his parents died and he was left all alone living in a giant holodeck on that dilithium planet. And because his mom died, he screamed and it caused some kind of chain reaction in that dilithium, which then spread out to the whole galaxy and blew up everyone's dilithium. It is kind of ridiculous, but it is also similar to many stories we saw in TNG, for example. There was an episode about a kid who lived his whole life in a holodeck on some planet, and there was the story of that omnipotent entity who lost his wife when they were attacked by some aliens, and then he used his powers to wipe out that whole civilization of aliens. And so it's not really that different from those kinds of stories that we saw in TNG, and so I don't really have that big of an issue with it. And also what I think is interesting about season 3 was that running theme I mentioned of people suffering some kind of tragedy and then having to figure it out and overcome it. And the same with the bigger story of the Federation. The Federation basically suffered a huge loss and are now kind of hiding away depressed, and yet they are able to come out of it, to figure out what happened and to overcome it and to fix itself. And the same with individual characters throughout season 3. We had a few storylines like that as well. And especially I remember liking that episode about Adira, who also suffered some tragic loss of her boyfriend, who gave her the Trill symbiote, but because it was such a tragic event, she basically suppressed all that memory, and because of that wasn't able to connect with her Trill symbiote, and so she had to overcome it by facing what happened, remembering it, and then becoming a whole person again. And I think that was actually my favorite episode of the whole show. It was the only episode which actually made me feel something. And now that I think about it, season 2 of Picard also had a similar element with that whole story about Picard's tragic childhood, when he accidentally caused the death of his own mother and felt guilty about it, and he suppressed that memory and wasn't aware of it, but it caused him all kinds of emotional problems. They imply that was the reason why he never got into a serious relationship with any woman, maybe because of his guilt of causing the death of the first woman he loved, his mother, and he suppressed it all, and so to overcome it he had to first discover what happened, confront it, and forgive himself and be free of that subconscious guilt. And so season 3 of Discovery has something very similar with all these little stories of characters with tragedies which they have to overcome, and also the bigger season story of the tragedy of the galaxy and the Federation, and also having to figure out exactly what happened and fix it, and that way be able to be restored. And so I kind of like those elements of season 3. And also when they arrived to this future, I liked how the characters themselves, because they came from the past, they are amazed by all the new technologies. And so it brought back that sense of wonder and awe. It almost makes it worthwhile that the show started out as a prequel, because thanks to this we have this new situation of our characters being from the past and now are in a more distant future and being amazed by that. So it kind of brought back that feeling of wonder that I remember I used to love in Star Trek, something that kind of disappeared over time because we keep seeing the same things over and over again, and the characters themselves are kind of used to it all. But suddenly we have characters who jumped to the distant future and are now seeing things which are amazing to them. That brought back that sense of wonder and excitement and curiosity that Star Trek needs to have. And so even though season 4 was kind of what Star Trek should be, but it's also something we saw a bunch of times before. So at least season 3 felt kind of more fresh. It was trying out new things, it was shaking things up. And Saru was the captain of Discovery for most of the season, so that's another big plus. And we had a bunch of scenes of Michael getting chewed up by the Admiral and stuff like that, which was fun. And I'm really tempted to put it as the best season. However, I cannot forget or forgive all those silly scenes of some really idiotic moments. For example, Giorgio being able to blink in a certain way to disrupt holograms, and Book seeing his own ship, which was in high orbit of the planet, but he could see it and hear it from the surface, and all kinds of moments like that, which were just so stupid that it really brings the entire season down. And also the villain Osira wasn't really that interesting, and so because of all those stupid moments and things that don't make any sense, and not just scientific mistakes, but basic common sense things didn't make any sense, and so because of that I can't really put it as the top season. So I think I will have to put season 4 as the least bad season of Discovery, even though it is kind of boring, especially in the first half of it, but at least it didn't have as many stupid or annoying things. It also had the least annoying characters, because they got rid of most of the annoying characters, including Giorgio, who I personally didn't really like, and she was in a lot of season 3. And so overall season 4 had the least amount of annoying characters, and it had the most science fiction story of all the seasons, and toward the end it had some really good scenes of them communicating with those exotic aliens, finding ways to talk with them, and eventually make a kind of a peaceful solution in the spirit of Star Trek. And so season 4 was the closest one to a Star Trek kind of show from all the seasons of Discovery. And even though it is kind of the most boring season, it's also the least annoying with the least annoying characters. So I'm not saying it's a great season by any means, but relatively to all the other seasons, it's the least bad. And so that's why I do think season 4 is at the top of my list, with season 3 being a close second, season 1 as a third place, season 2 in the fourth place, and season 5 in the bottom fifth place. And it was hard to rank it because they are kind of so different from each other, and so it's really hard to compare and rank them, and they're also really close together in terms of quality. So it's not easy to make this ranking, but it gave me a way to talk about the entire show overall and review a lot of elements of it. So that's my opinion. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it all in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.